Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Carol Van Sickle. I work primarily out of our Meta Solutions Athens office. Today, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite subjects every year, STRS Advance. We just love it. It's always a challenge. So hopefully the information I cover today will help you with getting through that process. Let me switch my screen over to the documents we're going to be going over. So there's four documents that I'm going to be covering. I also have a demo account we can look at some things in, but unfortunately it's not set up to do STRS advanced processing. So I have some specific examples and screenshots in these documents. So let's just get to the first one here. So the first one we're going to go over is this STRS Advance Report Cleanup and Balancing document. So on this document, we're just going to try and explain, what is STRS Advance? And also it's going to be just a summary of the other reports that we're going to talk about in detail and cover. So let's review this first, and then we'll move on to the specific reports that you're going to want to look at. So a lot of people ask, what is STRS Advance? What is that for? So STRS Advance reporting is something that takes place at the end of every fiscal year, and it reports all of your STRS employees' fiscal year contributions and their service credit percentage for that fiscal year. Now, the majority of your STRS employees are going to complete their work days on their contract by June 30. But they're still paid accrued wages during the summer months. So at July and August, they're still getting paid because they're stretch paid employees. So those are the employees that should go into what we call advance mode for those summer payrolls. And what that means is the USPS system is going to actually be able to calculate the STRS contribution amounts that will be collected during those summer pays that actually belong to the previous fiscal year. Okay, because your employees have earned all of that money in the prior fiscal year, but they're getting paid some of that money in the new fiscal year. So STRS wants to keep those contributions in the appropriate fiscal year to when they were actually earned. Okay, so that's pretty much basically what STRS Advance is keeping track of that money that really belongs to the prior year. Okay, let me scroll up a little bit here. So on my second bullet point, STRS Advanced Tracking in the USPS system will report what we call advance money that applies to the previous fiscal year. So it'll keep it separate from any new money that's earned during the new fiscal year. So if you're paying anybody new monies for the new year in July and August, your STRS per pay report will keep that separate. And that's what the next bullet point talks about. So when you run your STRS per pay file during those summer pays, it will report contributions that belong to the previous fiscal year versus the current fiscal year. And it does that once you set your employees in STRS advance mode. Okay. So while I'm mentioning the STRS per pay file, I did get a screenshot of a per pay file. I can find my folder here. Bear with me just a second here. Okay, so I have this screenshot here. Sure I do. Sorry, I have a window in my way. Let me minimize that. Okay, here we go. Per pay report. Okay, so on this screenshot here, I just took a little snippet of the STRS per pay report. So you'll notice this was a report from last year in July. So July 5, 2024 was the pay date. And you can see there's an advanced amounts column on the report. So whenever it's marked true, that means that contribution is from an employee that was placed into advance mode for the summer pays. So this contribution really belongs to the previous fiscal year. Okay, so when you create that per pay submission file, it will be marked to let STRS know that these contributions belong to the previous fiscal year. And then if you paid any employees, STRS employees, any new money for the new fiscal year, then of course, in this column for advanced amounts, that would be marked false. Okay, so that's what helps keep everything separate so STRS knows how to apply that money in their system. Okay, so then we have on this bullet point here for more details about the basics of STRS advanced reporting, including the criteria for the reports. So if you want to know more about how employees get on each report, we have a recording that was done last year, last June, and it's called STRS Advanced Beginner Refresher Training. And we have a direct link to it here. This will go to the YouTube channel where that recording is located if you want to check that out. And along with that, there is an STRS Advanced Basic Training document that goes along with that, and the direct link for that is located on this document as well. Okay, and of course, anytime you have any questions, please feel free to type something in chat, which reminds me I did not open my chat box, so let me do that. See if anything comes in. Okay, let's move that to my other screen here. I'll try and keep an eye on it, but other members of the fiscal support team they'll help keep an eye on those as well. So they may answer you directly, or they might let me know, hey, there's a question for you, so we can address those. And also, if you have a microphone, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question as well at any time. Okay, so now we're going to briefly discuss each of the reports that you'll be running. Okay, and before I go into all of these, let me log into my demo account. See if I can find that. Over here. Okay. And then up here, let me see if I can move this little thing that's kind of in my way. I don't think it's going to let me move it. Okay, I guess I'll just have to, there we go. Okay, so let me log into my demo account. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, having to do this every fiscal year, but if there's anybody that's newer to USPS, I want to make sure you know where this is located. So when you run the STRS Advanced reports, and you can run them now, we highly recommend it actually. The earlier you can start on these, the better, to get them cleaned up and ready. And then we recommend you, occasionally run them again just to make sure everything still looks okay. And I'll talk about, the running of the reports a little more later as well. So under the reports dropdown, you're going to follow that down to your STRS reporting section, and then just follow that over to STRS Advance. Okay, so when you come in here, you're going to see there's 3 reports here. Okay, we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail. So you can run these anytime, multiple times. Okay, it doesn't hurt a thing. Be very cautious though about this button. Okay, you do not want to click that button until you come to that option on our fiscal year closing checklist. Okay, if you accidentally click it, it will give you this message. Okay, so if you see that, make sure you cancel out until you're actually ready to create that submission file. Should you accidentally hit continue and accidentally create it, please contact us right away, because we'll have to do a few things in the files in order to back that out. Okay. All right. Flip back to my document here, because I don't want to get ahead of myself, because I'm good at doing that sometimes. Okay. So this section on what do I do with the reports. So we do highly recommend you start reviewing them as early as possible. I've already seen a couple of tickets with some people that have already been checking it, which is great. Now is a good time to start looking at those if you have the time. Like I said, the sooner the better. So I do have a specific recommendation on how to work through the reports. So the first one that's recommended is the STRS non-advanced positions report. This report lists your stretch pay employees that will not go into STRS Advanced. So you want to focus on this one first. This is usually the easiest one to work with, and it helps clean up a lot of things right away, especially when you're running it this early. So what we recommend you do is compare the report you're running now to the one that was run last fiscal year. So to do that, you would go to Utilities, File Archive, and find your fiscal year folder from last fiscal year. Download that report and then compare it to the one that you're running now. The current year's report should look like last year's report. Okay, and if I scroll down a little, so what you should see on the report is only employees that are not going into advance mode. So that is typically your administrators. So in most cases, they work on their current contract into July. So they're working new days in the new fiscal year on the current contract. Okay, so in their case, they're not going to complete all their work days on contract before June 30, so they should not go into advance mode. So that's who should be on there. So, and I've seen a district that they actually didn't have anybody that met their criteria, so their non-advanced report was blank. I've seen some that have only one person on there, and that's the superintendent. I've seen other districts that have, they might have principals or other admin type employees on this report. Okay, so just make sure they meet that criteria. They haven't completed all their work days on the current contract by June 30. And then, so that's the main thing you're looking for. And then if you see others on the report, those are the ones you want to fix. So you want to fix anybody that should not be on that report. So the best way to do that is to verify the information on the employee's compensation record. And again, I have a specific example of doing this when we get to this specific report document. But you want to look at their work days, their days worked. Usually one of those two is incorrect, and that's why they're on the report. Okay, that's the most common reason they show up. And then you'll notice in this next section here, for option B here, if you see a lot of employees on the report that should be advanced, that typically occurs when their days worked is not correct in their compensation record. And it's usually because the start date on their first pay on the contract is after the employee's compensation start date. For example, if the compensation start date was August 18, but their first payroll, when they're paid on first pay on contract, if that start date is August 20, well, you can see you're going to miss 2 days worked that will show up on the compensation record. Okay, so that's a very common occurrence. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to the report details. Okay, and you'll notice that, I do reference at the bottom here, the STRS non-advanced positions report document has more details and specific examples. And that's what we'll go through next after we talk about the other reports. Okay, so the other reports we're going to look at after the non-advanced is the STRS advanced positions report. So that would be the next report that you'll want to take a look at. This will list your stretch pay employees that will go into STRS advance. Okay, so you do want it to calculate their advance or their STRS contribution for those summer pays. And what you're going to review on that report is their percentage of service credit to make sure that looks okay. And then you can also do balancing on this report by going to the bottom of the page and calculating 14% on the contract amount due and compare that to what it calculates for total amount advanced. Okay, so we'll specifically go over that document with examples as well. And then the third report to review would be the STRS Advance fiscal year to date report. Now that report is going to have everybody on it. So everybody that contributed to STRS for the year will be on there. On that report, you're going to want to look at the service credit as well on that report, because you'll want to check all of your employee service credit and make sure that looks okay. You're also going to want to look for errors and warnings. This is the report that will show you any errors and warnings for any employees. So you want to take a look at that, get rid of errors for certain, look at any warnings. If there's a warning on there that, you verify their information is okay. You don't have to make a correction. You can if you want, but warnings are, I believe, are okay. And team, correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, but I believe warnings are okay to leave. And for this report, you definitely want to run it as many times as necessary to clear errors and warnings off of the report. The other thing you want to look at on this report is if you have any rehired retirees, you want to double check those employees and make sure they're being reported correctly. So again, we'll go over specific examples of that in that document. The other things to think about for this report are back postings. And what we mean by back postings are, that's the process you use if you have any employees that you pay in July, but it was for work they completed in June. So maybe you had somebody teaching some courses over the summer. So they worked in June, but then you didn't pay them until July. Well, that was work in the previous fiscal year, so that really should be reported to STRS in that previous fiscal year. So you would want to do the back posting process in that situation. So there's two steps to doing a back posting. One is to contact STRS for assistance to make sure the contribution and service days for that payment are applied to the previous fiscal year on their system. The second thing you would want to do is you wanted to remove that information for that employee from showing up on the current fiscal year STRS advance report. So you would remove that employee, and there are instructions from the SSDT in their documentation, and the section of the documentation is called Removing Last Fiscal Year Earnings and Contributions from STRS Advance. Okay, so they give you the exact steps you need to take them off of this year's report if you have that situation. Okay, and then here on number D, before closing the fiscal year, you also need to take into consideration any docs or contract payoffs that might occur during advance. Those can be addressed ahead of time if you know about them, and that will prevent there's some steps you can do to then prevent the STRS advance amount paid back over the summer to ensure it matches the advanced amount that you report to STRS. And then for E, you want to balance the STRS fiscal to date report. And if you want, we do have a balancing spreadsheet that you can use as well. Okay, and then of course we reference that document that has more details. Okay. Any questions so far about what STRS advance is or anything about the reports right now? Like I said, we're going to go into more detail on each report here. Okay, I don't see anything in chat, so I'm just going to keep moving on. Okay, so now we're going to look at the more details about the non-advanced positions report. Okay, so we do have a table of contents here. If there's something specific you need to reference, you can go to that page number. So we explain here, what the report is. So again, that's your stretch paid positions that should not go into STRS advance. So again, this is typically your administrators, anybody that works in their current contract after June 30. So if they don't complete their days before June 30, they would not go into advance. Okay, so we're not calculating anything special over the summer for them. Now, I do have a screenshot of an example of a non-advance report, that looks good. So in this example, the district has 260-day administrators. So their contract goes from August 1 to 7/31. So this is an obvious example of, they're not going to go into advance because they're going to continue to earn into July, into the new fiscal year. Okay. On the next page, okay, here's another example of the non-advance payment report, and you can see we have the days in contract and the days worked as of June 30 that are on the report. Okay, so the days in contract, that value is coming directly from the employee's compensation record contract work days. The days worked as of June 30 is actually taking the employee's compensation record days worked, plus it's adding work days from their calendar from the last payroll they were paid on. So whenever you run this report, look at the last payroll you processed and look at that payroll end date. So the report will look at that ending date, it will look at their calendar and any days it finds on the calendar through June 30 and add that on to the days worked from the compensation record. So that's where it's getting the days worked. So for example, when you run this report, so when I ran a report just to check, the last payroll processed for the employee was for the period of 3/1 to 3/15. So the start and end date was 3/1 to 3/15. So in that example, the report would go out to the employee's calendar and look at the range from 3/16 through June 30 and find all the work days in that range. It would then add those to the days worked value on the employee's compensation record. You also want to keep in mind that on the calendars, only the work, holiday, and calamity days on the calendar is counted as a day worked. Makeup days are not. And I have a specific example that we'll talk about where makeup day was placed on the calendar, but there was no corresponding calamity or work day. Okay, so they were off because of that. So I'll show you that example here in a little bit. Okay, if the days worked is not accurate, it is common, again, for it to be missed at the beginning of the contract year. That's usually the most common situation. It can be fixed using the best option that fits your situation. So keep in mind too that if the days worked is not correct, that means the amount earned and accrued wages aren't accurate as well. But you do have two options to fix it. Option one here is you can create a compensation adjustment record on the employee's compensation record. And that works really well if you only have one or just a couple of employees that are affected by this. However, if you want to use that option, you have a lot of employees in that situation, there is a mass load option that can be used as well, if you prefer. But option two is actually the easiest way to fix it. And that's why checking these reports right now really helps. Oh, and I see your message, Heidi. Yep, and what I was just talking about. That's why it's important to run these reports now. Okay, because if you catch this now, it's easier to fix with option two, because what you can do is add additional work days to the job calendar for a future pay that you're going to process. And then the system will just automatically pick up those extra days and get everything fixed. So it'll get their days worked updated. It will calculate the correct amount earned. So it takes care of all of that for you. So that's really the easiest way to do it. And again, I'll show you specific examples of both of these options. Okay. All right, so this is the most common reason that it's off. So days missed at the beginning of the contract year. So this is an example that I found at a district, and they had a large group of employees that should advance, but they were actually listed on the non-advanced report. The screenshot shows you the first employee of about 150 positions that should not be on the report, so it was a pretty big report. Notice that the days worked as of June 30 is showing 180 days versus the days in contract of 182. So right there, you can tell there's 2 days missing. Okay, so if you see that on your report, you may know, based on who the employees are, what exactly happened. So you might not really need to research it. But if you don't know, or if you just want to double check, the first thing you're going to want to do is, look at one of those employees, look at their compensation record. You'll want to look at the job calendar that's assigned to them, look at their compensation start and stop dates, and also take a look at their days worked and work days. Okay, so I have a screenshot on the next page of an example of that. Okay, so you can see for this example, I have job calendar 182. Here's their compensation start, compensation stop, and their days worked is 126, work days is 182. Okay, so what I do then is go to that job calendar. Let me scroll a little bit here. If you go to the job calendar and enter the compensation start and stop date for the custom date range, then that will confirm how many days are in the calendar in that range. Okay, so you can see down here, I have the 182 calendar. I entered in the compensation start and stop date. And so I confirm here that my work days of 182 does match what's on their compensation record. Now, to verify the days worked value, what you'll want to do is look for the employee's first pay on that contract. In this example, that first pay was September 5, and the pay period range for that payroll was 8/21 to 9/5. The last payroll paid at the time the report was run was the 3/5 payroll, and that was run from 2/12 to 3/5. Okay, so we want to look at the range of those payrolls that were processed, starting with the 8/21/24 date through the 3/5/25 date. Okay, but right away in this example, you should notice the compensation start date was August 19, right? But our first pay on contract, the start date was 8/21. So right there, it's like, oh, yeah, it sounds like maybe we missed a couple of days at the beginning of the contract. So to verify that, while you're on the calendar, you can, hit these back buttons until you get back to August. And in this case, you can see, yeah, my first pay started on August 21, but they did work the 19th and the 20th, so those days were missed. You can also confirm it by putting in that range that we found up here from the first pay to the last payroll that's been paid when the report was run. So if I put that date range in of 8/21/24 to 3/5, that only counted 126 days, okay, which matches what's in the days worked field on the compensation record. So again, I'm missing these 2 days. So it really should be 128 worked. Okay, so we'll go through each of the options to fix this. So again, the easiest way to do this, since we're running this so early, is the easiest way is just add some days on the calendar. So, for your next payroll, add a work day for the weekend. So it's only 2 days. You could get it done in the next payroll. And this works best, though, if all of the employees assigned to that calendar, are in that same situation. Okay, or at least a majority of them are. So you do want to keep in mind, in the example I have over 150 employees in the same situation. They happen to be on the same calendar. But you have to keep in mind any employees that maybe are on this calendar that were hired like mid-year. This might not affect them, so you might not want to update their days worked. Okay, but if it's only one or a couple of people, just keep in mind who they are, because you can go ahead and do this fix for that calendar and then just go back and manually fix those couple of people to make sure they're okay. So you can add those days to the calendar, and I'll just show you how to do that here, just in case anybody's not familiar with that. Let me get back to my demo account. Okay, so if I go to, let's just pick a calendar. So I'm going to go to Core, Job Calendar. Okay, and I'm just going to edit this calendar here just as an example. Okay, I do see a question. Oh, okay, and Heidi did answer, but I'll just mention it. We are only adding days for the folks who need corrected, right? Yes, that is correct. So again, in this example, everybody that's on this calendar, or at least the majority of them, are on that non-advanced report because they're missing 2 days worked. Okay. So this is a good example of using this. Okay. So if you remember, in my example, March 5 was the ending date of the last payroll processed. So if I want to go ahead, so let's say there's already work days on this calendar. Again, I'm in a demo account, so a lot of stuff is not filled in. So on Saturday, in that payroll period, and on Sunday, I'll just go ahead and add 2 work days. So that'll add 2 additional work days. When I process this next payroll, those 2 additional days will show up as days worked for the employee, plus it'll calculate amount earned, which will also affect the amount due or accrued wages. Okay, so that's the easiest way to do it, because that fixes everything for you and you don't have to, do a lot of manual changes or a mass load or anything like that. Okay. Again, that's why it's so important to run these early to check for that kind of thing, because now's the time you can get those in a payroll and get those fixed before the end of the fiscal year. So what you would do is go ahead and process that payroll, get it posted. Everything looks good. You can come back to the calendar, just right click, select none, and go ahead and get rid of them again. Okay, there's no reason to keep them on there now. You were only doing that as a fix. Okay, so that's one option for fixing it. Okay, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, yeah. So this last paragraph, so keep in mind this option will only work if the extra days are processed prior to June 30, so prior to your last payroll of the fiscal year. Otherwise, the next option would have to be used. And if you do have a large number of employees that need fixed, there is a mass load option for this. But what you could do is you can use the compensation adjustment. Okay, so this works really great if you only have a few employees that are affected that need to be fixed. Or like I said, there is a mass load for this if you need that option. Okay, so in this example, okay, so this gives step-by-step how to do it, but I'll show it to you on the compensation record here. So you're going to edit the compensation record. And then let me show it to you over here. Again, for anybody that might not be familiar. So I'm just going to go to core compensation just to pick somebody that has a contract compensation. So we'll do this first person. So what you want to do is go into edit on their compensation record, scroll down to the compensation adjustment section, which is right here. Oh, it's like something already happened with this one. But you're going to do a create. And then you see there's a days worked field. So you can enter. So in the example, it was 2 days that was missed. You could go ahead and enter the 2 days. And before I do that, okay, in this example, this employee that noticed their days worked is 174. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 days. So as soon as I hit save, I'm going to close this box and scroll up. Okay, you see now it's at 176 days worked. Okay, so that's what that example on the document is going through. So it shows days worked of 2 was entered. Click save, and then the example that was used here, they were at 126, and now this updated it to 128. So if you were to run the STRS not advanced report again, that employee would no longer be listed because now their days worked is updated. Okay, keep in mind though, when you're updating days worked this way, it's not going to recalculate amount earned automatically. So if you want to update amount earned to be more accurate, you would have to calculate those 2 days on the employee's unit amount. Okay, in this example, the employee I'm working with, their unit amount is 235.552 times 2 days comes to 471.10. So if you want to update that as well, in that same adjustment record, you can go ahead and put in that additional amount for the amount earned. And then when you click save, it will update amount earned, which will also automatically update the accrued wages. So below this example here, this is a screenshot of what the amount earned looks like now after the adjustment. Okay. And if you look below that, that's a screenshot before the adjustment. So you can see it did increase by that amount. And you'll also notice accrued wages is different as well because it will recalculate that automatically. Let's see, I have a note from somebody on the team. They need to be careful what unit amount they use. Excuse me, if days missed at start of contract could be different unit amount based on that. Yeah, that's true. Excuse me, good point. Yeah, so, make sure the unit amount is accurate depending on what's happened with that employee during the year. If you had like a mid-year contract change with no retro, you might have to use a different amount for amount earned. So that's a good point. Thank you. Okay. So now the amount earned is updated and so is accrued wages. If you want to double check amount earned, that is usually calculated by taking the total number of days worked times the daily rate. And then, so if you do that calculation, it should equal this amount earned here that we updated. Okay. And again, just be careful if you had any changes with the employee during the year. It might not work out exactly right depending on the situation. The accrued wages, the reason that updated automatically is because it's always calculated by taking the amount earned minus amount paid minus amount docked. Okay, that calculation is how you get to the accrued wage amount. So as soon as we updated amount earned, it redid that calculation and updated accrued wages. Okay, so now you'll notice below that, there's the question, do I need to update amount earned and accrued wages? Not necessarily. The only reasons I know of to make sure that's accurate is if your district uses the wage obligation reports, or if you know there might be a mid-year contract change involved for the employee, then you want to make sure that is accurate for certain. Always a good idea, to make your information as accurate as possible. But unless you have those situations, it's not really necessary. Okay. Recommended, but not necessary. Okay. And then the big question, can I prevent this issue from occurring in the future? Yes, actually, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. So there's actually 3 options to prevent this so you don't have to mess with this. Okay. One option is when you activate the new contracts for your employees for the new year, and you're going to have this situation. It's like, hey, my payroll start date is going to be a couple days after the employee's actual first work day on their contract. So when you know that ahead of time, one of the things you can do is make sure you activate their new contract prior to initializing the last payroll for the old contract. Okay, so one of the things you have to keep in mind when you do that, though, is in order for it to work properly, you have to make sure the old contract's compensation stop date is 1 day prior to the new compensation start date. For the most part, I think everybody pretty much does that, when you're setting up your contracts. So when we were looking at that employee example above, their compensation stop date on the record is 8/15. So we want to make sure the new compensation start date for the new contract is 8/16. And I think that if we look at the calendar, I think that fell on a weekend, I believe. Typically the compensation start date is the first day they work on contract, or sometimes it's in line with the first start date. It just depends, but it should include, their work days, first work days they work. In this case, I think with that, sorry, I'm looking at the calendar just to verify. If I look at the August calendar for 2025, okay, yeah, so the August 15th stop date was a Friday. So I'm just making sure the new contract compensation start is the next day. It happens to be a Sunday, but that's fine. The first day the employee is going to actually work in my example is going to be August 18. Okay, because that's typically around the time that they started every year prior. Okay. Okay. And let's see, somebody asked me if staff starts on 8/14, this will not work. That's correct. So if their first work day happened to be 8/14, then in order for this to work, you'd actually have to change the compensation stop date to be 8/13 and then make the new compensation start date 8/14, and then it will work. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, I hope that made sense. If I'm confusing you, let me know. Okay, the other thing to keep in mind, the last pay on the old contract, okay, so the last pay in this example is going to be August 20. Oh, I do see a question. What if the last pay on contract for this year is August 20? Well, and actually that's my example. Okay. Okay, the dates might be different though. Okay, so okay. So I'll try and address your question here, Susan, with this paragraph that I'm going over. So hopefully it'll help. If not, let me know. Okay, so my example, Oh, you're fine, Susan. Okay, so my example, my last pay on the old contract for this district is going to be August 20. The start and end date for that is going to be 8/6 to 8/20. And you don't have to change that, okay? Even if, because remember, this is the last pay on the old contract. If that range happens to include workdays on the new contract, you don't necessarily have to change it. You can if you want. So like in the example, let's say they actually worked August 14 for their first pay. Well, in this example, they're actually going to work August 18 and 19. Okay, so in this date range, in my example, the employee's first workday is going to be August 18. They're also going to work on the 19th. That's included in the old contract start and end date range, right? That's fine. You can leave it that way if you want. It'll pick it up, but you know, if you want it to be a really clean compensation record, you can change the end date to be 8/17 so it doesn't pick up those days if you want, but it's not really necessary. It's not really going to hurt anything. It just depends on what you want to see on the compensation record, the old compensation record. But if you do that, okay, if you shift the ending date, it kind of changes what I'm showing here. If you do that, you're gonna want to, well, and actually that's my next example. So I'm actually getting ahead of myself here. So let me skip to the next example. So you can do it this way, which is, well, let me focus on this first. Sorry, I get off the rails if I start thinking ahead too much. Okay, so let's stick with this. And I think this one might answer your question, Susan. So you can do it one of these two ways. Okay, so the first method is just leave it alone. Okay, right? So August 20 payroll, pay period date range, start and end date is 8/6 to 8/20. That's going to include 2 work days in the new contract. So if you use this method, what you're going to do is go ahead and activate the new contract record before you initialize the last pay on the old contract. The system will see all of these dates. And then when you initialize it, it's going to say, oh, wait a minute, August 18 and 19, that's 2 work days in the new compensation record that was just activated. So it will see that and it will look at those 2 days and say, hey, that belongs to the FY26 contract. And it'll go ahead and calculate the earnings. Now, it's not going to pay them anything. It's just going to accrue those 2 days and it's going to calculate the earnings. The employee will still only be paid for the last pay of their FY25 contract. Okay. Okay, I see another question, but I'm going to address that just in a second because I don't want to lose my train of thought. The other option, so option 2 here, instead of worrying about activating the new contract before initializing the last pay, making sure those compensation end and start dates for the old and new are within a day of each other. The other way you can handle it is just extend the payroll start date for the first pay on contract. So again, using that example, I mean, I can keep my, so you're not going to activate the new contract before initializing the last pay of the old contract in option 2. In this one, you're just adjusting the period begin and end dates for payroll. Now, for the last pay on the old contract, you can leave it as is in that example. It'll pick up those 2 work days. If you don't like that, you can adjust the end date, for that. You might want to do it just on that specific pay group, though, that you want affected. Or, just leave it as is, but then when you do the new payroll, so now you've completed paying the old contract for FY25, it's done. Now you activate your new contracts for FY26, but hey, for this pay group, it's going to be missing 2 days unless I extend my start date. Okay, so instead of my start being August 21, I would make my start date August 18. But again, you want to make sure you apply that to the pay groups that affects. It might not matter for your other pay groups, and if it doesn't, that's fine. But then you have to be careful with your STRS employees, right? Because they're very picky about the dates. Okay, so just kind of keep all that in mind. So you have those 2 options. The first one, you would want to activate their new contract prior to initializing their last pay on the old contract. The second option, you don't have to do that, and instead you're just going to extend your start date so you can pick up those extra work days. The third option, okay, use the calendars like we did before. Okay, everybody's in that same pay group. They're probably on the same calendar. Add those additional work days for your payroll. So add 2 weekends as a work day. When you run that payroll for the normal payroll start and end date that you would normally use, it'll pick up those extra days. So you can always do it that way right at the start. And again, after the payroll is posted, you can go back to the calendar, remove those extra days so that doesn't confuse you in the future. Okay, so I'm sorry. So let me look at the question that was in chat. Why would a district have start end dates that cross on a contract? For example, or example of when would this happen? It just depends on how districts set their start and end dates. Everybody does it differently. So sometimes it does, cross, so you'll have those days on a new contract in the old or the last pay of the old contract. It happens all the time. That's why a lot of people have this issue. Okay. Everybody does their dates differently. I've seen all kinds of things. So, okay. So I hope that helps. Okay, so I hope that helped answer everybody's question, and I hope that wasn't too confusing. Hopefully that makes sense, and it'll help you with helping to prevent this issue in the future if you run into it. Okay. And as always, reach out to our team if you have any additional questions. Okay. So the next example I have here is you have a day missed because of makeup days and no corresponding calamity or work day. Okay. I just happened to come across this with the district when I was trying to find examples, for this training. So this was a great example. So this was, again, I ran the non-advanced payment report or positions report, depending on what you look at. It says either payment or positions. I don't know why it's not consistent. But on the non-advanced report, I had another large group of employees that were listed on here. But it's like, well, yeah, these people should advance, usually your teachers. Perfect example. They complete their work days by June 30. They should advance. Okay. So this screenshot is showing 2 of those positions. Okay. And you can see days in contract, 184, but their days worked as of June 30, it's 2 days short, right? So again, I just went through the same steps of figuring out what happened, thinking it would be, probably something at the beginning of the contract, like the previous example. Okay, but it wasn't. Okay, so I looked at one of the employees. I looked at their compensation record. They were on job calendar 100. Here's their compensation start and stop date. Days worked, 126. Contract work days, 184. So again, I went to the calendar. Okay. And I plugged in the compensation start and stop date for the custom date range. And there's a screenshot here below. Okay. So here's the compensation start and stop date on that calendar. Work days are 182. Makeup days are 1 or 2. So 184 days total, right? So you think, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. It was 184 work days. Well, keep in mind that for days worked, it does not look at makeup days. Okay, so if those 2 makeup days were on the calendar when payroll was processed, those weren't picked up as days worked. Okay, so I just verified by looking at, again, I looked at the first payroll for the contract and the payroll that was last processed when I ran the report. So again, I got that date range and used that in the custom date field on the calendar. So, and actually in this example, I think I just stuck with the 7/21. Sorry, got ahead of myself again. So actually I just plugged in the compensation start date again, but the last payroll that was processed, the end date was 3/1. So I plugged that in. And so I should have 128 days, right? Okay, but if I go back up here to the compensation record, days worked was only 126. So that pretty much confirms to me those 2 makeup days were in that range, but they weren't counted as days worked. Okay, so that's what confirmed that, hey, those 2 makeup days didn't count it as days worked. Okay, so just keep in mind, whenever you have a calamity day, you typically put a C on the calendar. Cs are counted as a work day or day worked. And then if you have a makeup day for that calamity day, you can put that on the calendar as well as an M for makeup day. I know some districts sometimes for a calamity day, they'll remove the workday from the calendar and just move the workday to a later date for the makeup day. So either one of those would work, but if you have a makeup day, there should be a corresponding calamity day on the calendar. Okay, it'll make it, if you look at this, it'll make it look like there's extra days then if you have the calamity on here too. But remember, for days worked, it's not counting the makeup days. Okay, so again, in this situation, since we're running the report so early, we could just add 2 work days to their calendar, because again, it was a large group on the same calendar. And then again, that's the easiest way to fix it. Okay, any questions about that one? Okay. Now, this example isn't as typical, but sometimes the contract workdays might be incorrect. Okay, and here's an example of one that I found with that situation. So the first record below, which I don't know if I can get it on here while still seeing that. Yeah, we can't quite see it. But on the report, non-advanced report, for this first employee that I have in the screenshot below, their days in contract is 193. It's actually lower than the days worked as of June 30. Okay, so let me scroll down here. Okay, so this first line here, I was looking at this first record. I'm like, that's odd. It's unusual for days work to be higher than days in contract on this report. So when reviewing the employee, okay, I don't have a screenshot of the calendar, but you can see their start and stop date. They run from August 1 to 7/31. Days worked, I'm sorry, contract work days is 193. Contract days worked is 113. So again, I just went through the calendar just to kind of see, where everything, trying to verify the days values. Okay, so I calculated, so system looks at the employee's job calendar, calculates how many work days the employee has left from the last payroll end date through the compensation stop date. Okay, so their stop date was 7/31. Their last pay, we entered the date range of 1/26/25 through 7/31. Okay, so there's 90 days remaining from the last time they were paid. 90 days plus the 113 already worked on the compensation record, that's 203 days. Okay, so on the report, so it added to the 113 days worked here. So up here, that's how it got the 203 days. Okay, so that 125 was the next day after the last payroll end date, or 126, sorry. Okay. All right, so that's where the 203 came from. When I actually viewed the calendar and looked for the last workday on the calendar, it actually ended up being June 10. Okay, so here's a screenshot of that. Okay, so I went through the calendar and I said, okay, what work days are in June and July? Well, you can see there's nothing in July. So this employee is going to complete their work days before June 30, so they really should advance. So they should not be on the non-advanced report. Okay, so then I just verified the total work days on the job calendar. So I put in the compensation start and stop date, August 1 through 7/31. Well, that's 203 days, but that's not the number of work days that's on the compensation record. Okay, so why was that number not 203? So what I ended up doing was I ran an audit report on the compensation record, and I'll show you how you can do that. But through that compensation record, I was able to find that that 193 for work days was manually entered. So in this situation, it's actually the contract work days that needs to be fixed. And to fix that, all you have to do is edit the compensation record and update that field. Okay, because that is a modifiable field. And as soon as I did that and ran the non-advanced report, then the employee was no longer on the report. Okay. So let me show you in the demo account, see if it timed out on me. Okay, doesn't look like it did yet. So if you view a compensation record, there's an audit report button here at the top. Okay, so if you think you might have a situation like this, or you're just wanting to say, you know, when or how did this field get updated? You can go in here, just view the compensation record, click on audit report, and then you can put in a start and stop date of what dates you want it to look at. So if you think something may have changed recently with the compensation record, you know, you can put in a specific range and then generate the report. Okay. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, those are the only examples, specific examples I have about the non-advanced report. But I think that gives you all a good idea of what you're looking for. You know, making sure that report only has employees that should not go into advanced mode. Okay, so they're not completing contract days worked before June 30. That's the main criteria. And there's just a reminder on here, this will be on all of these documents. You know, check this report frequently. It's great to run it now, but you should still double check all of these reports through the fiscal year. Like I said, the more often you can do it, the better to keep everything clean. That'll make your closing for fiscal year go much quicker. Okay, if there's no questions about non-advanced, I'm going to move on to the advanced positions report. See, we've been going at this about an hour now. This would probably be a good time to take a short break. So if everybody's okay, we'll take maybe about 5 minutes. Hopefully that's enough for everybody. If you want to get up and stretch, get some coffee. I know I'd love to get a cup of coffee, so I think I'm going to go and do that real quick. So I am going to pause the recording if I can find my options here. There we go. And let's take a 5-minute break, everybody. Hey, everybody, we're back. So we're going to go over the next document, which is the STRS Advanced Positions Report. Okay, so again, we have on here, okay, what is this report? So again, this report will list your stretch pay employees that will go into STRS Advanced mode when you create the STRS Advanced file as part of the fiscal year and closing process. So just a reminder, that last sentence there is to please follow the meta fiscal year and closing procedure document for the appropriate fiscal year when it becomes available. Right now, we have last year's checklists out on our website, but we will get those updated as we get closer to the end of the current fiscal year. When you're running the STRS Advanced Positions report, we have a screenshot here of an example of the report. So that's some of the information that you will see on there. And what you'll want to look at on this report is the first thing is take a look at the credit. So when you look at the credit column, that is going to actually report to STRS the percentage of credit for the fiscal year. And just a reminder that employees with 120 more days will receive 100% credit. If the employee has less than 120 days, they will receive credit based on the STRS decision tree. And employees flagged as part-time receive credit based on the decision tree. The payroll item code 450 is what contains the full or part-time value. And if you have any questions regarding whether or not employee status should be full or part-time, please contact your STRS representative directly about that. We can't advise you on how they should be marked. That's definitely an STRS question. Keep in mind that for the service credit, if you have a rehired retiree, their service credit will always be 0% with contributions being reported. They should be marked with a Y in the rehired retiree column on the report. So if I scroll back up to the report, you can see that last column is that rehired retiree. Okay, so if you see a 0% here, and this is marked Y, that should be good. Okay, and you should be able to tell from the name of the employee that that is correct as well. Here's a tip for retiree. Whenever you hire a rehired retiree, I'll say it right one of these times. Don't forget to add or update their 450 payroll item record. There's 2 fields that you want to update, and they're highlighted in the screenshot below. So there's the rehired retiree box that you'll want to go ahead and check mark. And then to the right of that is a rehired date that you're going to want to fill in. So you want to do that as soon as possible when you know that happens. If you forget to set the rehired values prior to the employee's first pay as a rehired retiree, the SSDT does have detailed instructions on how to correct that information, and we have the direct link right there in the document for you. Okay. And we're going to have some specific rehired retiree examples that we're going to go through as well. Okay, now when you're reviewing this report and you see 0% service credit, but that employee is not a rehired retiree, I don't think that's that common on this report, because this is usually your stretch paid employees that are on an active calendar. But we'll talk about this again in the next report, with the next report as well. But if you do have that situation, typically what happens is it's an employee that you're entering attendance days for, but maybe the pay date value isn't getting updated. So there's a screenshot below of an attendance record, and this pay date column here is what the report looks at in order to count service credit days. Okay, so if for some reason these aren't getting filled in automatically, then that could be why it's not picking up any credit. But again, we'll have a specific example of that. I think that's actually going to be in the next document. Okay, so we'll talk more about that then when we get to that example. Okay, so first thing is, double check the service credit percentage, see how that looks overall. And then you can verify the total amount advanced. Okay, so you can go to the totals page of the advanced report. And if you look at the contract amount due that it's calculated, you can take that and multiply that by 14%. And by the way, this amount is actually coming from a calculation on all of the employees' compensation records. So all of the employees that are included in the report, it's actually calculating from their compensation record, their obligation minus their amount paid minus their amount docked to get what is due for the rest of their contract. So that's what this total represents. Please notice in this paragraph here, when you're running this report this early in the year, those amounts are going to be really large. When you run this report after you've processed a few more payrolls, you'll notice that amount's going to decrease. Okay, but same thing applies. You should be able to take that amount, multiply it by 14%, and then you want to compare that with the total amount advanced on the report. Okay, so for this example, we take the contract amount due, the $3,853,991.05 times 14%, and I get $539,558.75. The total amount advanced on the report is $540,496.02. That's the difference of $937.27. Okay. You want that to either match or be a very small amount. Okay, this is pretty large. So now it's like, okay, why do I have that large difference? Okay, so why do we have that? First thing to think about is, do you have any employees with STRS pickup on pickup? If so, that's most likely what your difference is. Okay, so that typically applies to your administrators, superintendents, sometimes principals, maybe other admin positions. So that's the first place to look. So in this specific example, the district superintendent happens to be the only employee that has pickup on pickup for retirement. So when I go to his information, okay, so here's a screenshot of his information. Most employees with pickup on pickup have an inflated withholding rate of 15.96%. So if we calculate the contract amount due which on this record is 47,855.09 times 0.1596, then we do get the advanced pickup amount of 7,637.71. And if you compare that to calculating that same amount at 14%, my difference is 938. I compared that to the original difference from the totals page up here, and I'm only off 73 cents. Okay, so that's much better amount. Okay, but what if I have a lot of employees with pickup and pickup, or I'm not positive everyone that even has it, or I located my pickup on pickup employees, but I'm still off a large amount? The other thing you can do is you can generate that same report and you can do it in CSV format. Okay, so then you can open that up in Excel. You can create a column in the spreadsheet then to do the calculation on the contract amount due times 14%, and then create another column to calculate the difference between that amount and then the total amount advanced from the report. And then you can do a filter and look for large differences. So here's a screenshot from the Excel spreadsheet where I did that, and I found that 938 difference right there. Okay, I'm going to pull up the spreadsheet that I did. If I can find my right folder here and get everything else out of my way. This is when I just about need a third monitor. Okay, get some stuff out of my way. Okay, so here's the spreadsheet that I did for that. I took out the name and social of the employees. Okay, and then you can see I have my filtering on. Okay, but, from the CSV I created from the report, it pulled in the contract amount due for all the employees, the advanced pickup, total advanced amount. I added this column, okay, and I put in the formula to calculate the contract amount due times 14%, so that's what this value is. And then I compared that to the total advanced amount column. And then you can see my differences. They're like within pennies of each other. But then when I did the filter and started looking through here, there's my 938. So once I found that, I just unselected everything, clicked that so I could go right to that record and I could see who that employee is. Okay. So that's an easy way to help you figure out why it's off. Okay. Oops. There we go. Okay. Okay, and then this last section on the document, this is just an example of what the system is doing, what the report is calculating for the advanced pickup amount. Okay, so again, it's calculating what's going to be withheld during the remaining pays. So here's the sample report up here. So for this employee, it calculated 2,301.29 of contributions that are still going to be withheld on their contract. This is a screenshot of the employee's compensation record. So what the system does on the report is it takes the employee's obligation amount. You can see that up here, 106,845. It also looks at their pay per period, which is right here, 4,109.42. And then it looks at their pays in contract and how many have already been paid. Okay, so there's 4 pays remaining. So for the 23rd, 24th, and 25th pay, it's just taking the pay per period times the 14% to calculate the contribution amount for each of those pays. But then when it gets to the 26th pay, that's the last pay on contract, system will do a contract payoff calculation. Okay, so if you look at the pay per period of 4,109.42 for those 3 pays up here, 23rd, 24th, and 25th pay, so that's 3 times, that total is 12,328.26. The compensation record amount paid already is the 90,407.24 plus what we calculated here for those 3 pays here. So total paid before the last pay in contract would be 102,735.50. So the last pay in contract calculation is going to be the obligation amount minus the total paid at that point, and that will equal this amount. So this is the final pay amount for the employee. Multiply that by the 14%, and then this is the contribution amount. So then you total all of these contribution amounts that are going to be paid to the employee, and you get the $2,301.29, and that matches what is on the report. So that's just an FYI, so you know what the system is doing to get that amount on the report. Okay, just in case, you question an amount for an employee, you can verify using this calculation what the report got. Okay, so that's just an FYI for you. And again, just a reminder, you'll want to check this report frequently through the fiscal year. Okay, any questions about the advanced report? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So now we're going to go and take a look at the final report. So this is the really fun one, right? Fiscal year to date report. Okay, so if we scroll down, we're going to take a look at what is this report. So this is going to have all of your STRS employees on it that you paid during the fiscal year. So the employees that were on your non-advanced report, the employees that are on your advanced report, any other employees. So if you pay employees by timesheet, you have other employees that are only paid a couple times during the year, they'll be on here as well. Okay, so you're going to want to do a final check on this report of everybody. Plus, a lot of the fields on this report are what is going to be on the actual submission file. Okay, so it's really important that this report be as accurate as possible. Okay, so if we go to the next page here, here's a sample screenshot of what you'll see on the fiscal year to date report. We've listed here the fields from this report that will actually be in the submission file. So the credit column you see here, that percentage of service credit, that will actually be reported in the submission file. The STRS days do not actually get reported to STRS, but they are on the report to help you verify that those are correct to get to the correct percentage that will be reported. The non-tax deposit / pickup column, which is this one right here. Okay, this is your STRS contribution amounts from the 591 and or 691 payroll item record for the employee. Okay, so those are the contributions that have been withheld up to the date that you run the report. The non-taxed advanced amount, which is the next column, okay, that's the advance amount calculated for the summer pays for employees that go into advance mode. And then the rehired retiree column is also used in the submission file. So anybody that's marked with the N for no, not rehired, retired, a space is reported on the actual submission file. It's called a membership type code. So for your active members, it's going to report a space on the file. Anybody that's marked yes for rehired retiree, they're going to have a code of R on the report or on the submission file, sorry. Okay. And this isn't as common, but there are some schools that withhold STRS employee contributions post-tax using the 450 payroll item record. If you're in that situation, your amounts are actually going to be in the next two columns. So you'll actually have a value in tax deposit pickup and taxed advance amount. Okay. So that's what the difference is between non-taxed versus the taxed columns. Okay, so then we're going to talk about credit again, because again, you want to verify the percentage of service credit that's being reported for your employees. Okay, so we have that same information here that was on the other document. There is a link on this document directly to where the STRS decision tree is located on the STRS webpage. I'm going to try and click it. Hey, it worked. Okay, so it'll take you to their service credit webpage. And you're going to be looking at the service credit decision tree that was effective July 1 of 2019. So if I click on this, this is what it looks like. So what you're going to do is you just start right here, and then you just follow it through depending on how you answer each question. And then it has more information over here in the bottom left. It talks about the state minimum salary that's being used as part of how everything is calculated. And then there is a second page that goes over full versus part-time service, and then more information about calculating part-time service. Okay, so if you have any questions about how it's coming up with the percentage, this should help you with that. Okay, figure out where I'm at here. There we go. Okay, now if you need to adjust STRS days for an employee, you can go to Core Adjustments and select the type of STRS retirement days. The transaction date has to be within the fiscal year in an open posting period. In the amount field, you can enter the number of days you want to adjust, and that can be a positive or negative value. And it's okay to leave all of the to-date fields marked. Can't remember if I had an example in here. I might, but I'm just going to go into my demo account. And again, just for anybody that might not be familiar, or maybe just as a refresher for some of you, if you go to Core Adjustments, so if you notice somebody's days is off for some reason, you can go to Core Adjustment, click on Create. I don't have a specific employee as an example, but you select your employee here. For this, you do not need to select a payroll item, because if you just go to Type, you can see that right here, you can select STRS retirement days. Okay, and again, your transaction date, it has to be in the fiscal year we're working on, and it has to be in a current or an open posting period. So my files are back in December. I'd have to use December unless I know I had another period open. Put in the number of days you're adjusting. If you're seeing too many, you can do a negative. Otherwise, just leave it a positive to add. You can put a description if you want, and then you can just leave these to date fields all marked. Doesn't hurt anything to have them all marked. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. Okay, now I had to ask about this because I'm running the report so early in the year. I noticed that in the screenshot above, I'll scroll back up to it. There were 2 employees listed on there at 100% service credit, but the days was only 113. And it's like, well, wait a minute, they're not at 120 days yet. Shouldn't that be a lower percentage? So I'm going to scroll back up so I can point that out. Okay, so right here, you'll notice 100% service credit, but it's only 113 days. It's like, well, wait a minute. They have to have 120 or more, right, to receive service credit? Well, not necessarily. Remember, it looks at the decision tree by STRS. So here is how it determined the 100% for those employees. So it just went through the decision tree. Is the employee full-time? Yeah, per their 450 record, they're set to full-time. Are the STRS retirement days less than or greater than 119? They're at 113, so that's less than the 119. Are the STRS days greater than 90? Yeah, they're at 113. Are the days employed, which is what they call the employment relationship, at least 120? Yes, it is. Is the employee salary greater than the minimum salary, which is currently $35,000? Yes, they are. So following the decision tree, they get 100% credit. Okay. So when it mentions employment relationship, what does that mean? That's listed down here. So per the STRS Ohio website, on their web page, there is a calculating service credit using days webinar questions and answers document. Okay, and here's a link directly to that document. And question number 6 on it is the 120-day employment relationship the same as number of days worked? Actually, no, it's not. Okay, so this is what the definition is in that Q&A. Okay. Now we're going to talk about rehired retiree, okay, because this is the most common thing that I see on the reports. Either there's 0% service credit for a rehired retiree, Or there's a rehired retiree with 2 lines on the report and maybe it should only be 1. It depends on the situation. So a lot of examples on this document are going to be about the rehired retiree. Again, if you have an employee in that situation, make sure their information is being reported correctly. Okay, so typically for your rehired retiree, you should see just 1 line at 0% credit, and that should be marked Y in the rehired retiree column. And, just verify the days and amounts look good. Okay, and it should be done. Okay. And then that same tip that was on the other document for rehired retiree is on here, just reminding you to update the 450 record. The link to the document if it doesn't get set correctly, which again, we're going to talk about in the examples. And then employee with 0% credit, that's not a rehired retiree. Remember, we talked about that earlier, and I have a specific example of that in here as well, and how to correct that. Okay. But what you want to look at first when you're looking at this report is look for those warnings and errors that are on the report. Okay, as you scroll through it, you'll see those, underneath the employees they apply to. But you could go right to the report totals section of the report, and it will tell you right at the bottom how many total warnings and errors are on the report. So you can go back and scroll through, or you can do the Control F if you're viewing it on your screen and do a find for warning or error to locate them. Now, keep in mind that the SSDT documentation, they have an STRS advanced document, and they do have an errors and warnings section. I'm going to try clicking on this. Let me see if it'll go to it or not. Well, it did take me to the documentation, but it didn't take me to that section. Okay. So, oops, I think I hear somebody. Somebody's not muted. Let's see if I can find them, or if somebody on my team can find them. Okay, I don't hear them now, so we might be good. Okay. So anyway, on the STRS Advanced document, that link should take you right to that section. It didn't for me. There are some issues with the links going to the right section, so SSDT is aware of that and they're looking into it. But if I scroll down here, the last option is the errors and warnings. And it did take me, well, kind of there. It's a little low, but if I go up, so when you find the errors and warnings on your report, the SSDT does have them on this document and they are listed alphabetically. So when you see one, you can come here, look it up, and this usually gives you some information, tells you, what does it mean? What do I look for? Maybe even how to correct it. So this is a good resource for you to reference. Okay. So now we're going to go into some specific examples. So I have an example here of an employee with no service days, and they're not a rehired retiree. Okay, so in this example, I found an employee that actually had 2 error messages, okay, both having to do with 0 service credit. And you can see they were paid a very small amount, so a small contribution amount for STRS. So if you know they're not a rehired retiree, then you can fix them using one of these options listed here. So you can enter an attendance day and make sure it has a pay date that's associated with that date for the attendance day. Or if they already have attendance days and you go and look, maybe the pay date's missing. You can go ahead and edit that record and manually add it. Okay. The way that pay date gets on the attendance record is when you put in the attendance days and then you pay that employee, and those days are included in that payroll start and end date. The system should automatically see that and automatically put in the pay date range. Okay. So if you're entering attendance days and they don't fall in that range, then that's how they get missed with that pay date being marked on them. Okay. So in that case, you can just manually put them in. Or if they were missing attendance days altogether, you can go ahead and add them, but you'll have to manually add in the pay date. Excuse me. The other option you have is you can go to core adjustment, and then you can use the type field of STRS retirement days like we showed earlier, enter in the transaction date in the current fiscal year in an open posting period, enter total number of days you're going to adjust in the amount field, And then again, we recommend just leaving all the to date fields marked. Okay, there's an example of that on the next page here. Okay, so you select the employee, put in type of STRS retirement days, make sure the date is in the current fiscal year and in an open posting period. In this case, we're only adjusting one day. Description, put whatever you like in there that helps you identify what it's for. And then to date options, just leave them all marked. Okay, next example is you have a rehired retiree. Okay, they rehired in for the full fiscal year. Okay, so they retired in a previous year. This fiscal year, you rehired them in. But the information that they're rehired as a retiree wasn't entered until after the first pay they were paid. Okay, so this is a really common situation. It happens a lot. So typically what you'll see on the fiscal year to date report is you'll see that employee listed, and they're going to actually have two lines. Okay, and usually there will be an error message as well. So you'll see one line that's marked no for rehired retiree, and then you'll see another line that's marked yes. Okay, so in this example, the employee was only paid one time for the fiscal year, but that rehire information was entered after the payroll was posted. Okay, so the employee's 450 payroll item record total section, I took a screenshot of that. Okay, so what I did was I looked at their 450 payroll item record. I went to the total section, and you'll notice there is a section for rehired retiree. Okay, so whenever you have a rehired retiree, they were rehired as a retiree for the full fiscal year. These fields in this section should match the amounts that are in the fiscal year to date historical total section. So what you want to do is you want to update these fields to have these same values. Okay, so the fiscal year to date rehired retiree employer amount should be 161. Okay, remember this is the 450 record. The fiscal year to date rehired retiree gross should be 1,150. So to fix this, you would go to core adjustment and then create these records. Okay, so here's the first one. So for the 161, you're going to select the employee, select their 450 payroll item, and then you'll be able to select this type that says portion of fiscal to date board amount that was earned as a rehired retiree. Again, your transaction date needs to be an open posting period in the fiscal year. Enter the amount, put whatever you want for the description. And then for the to date fields, you only have to fill in fiscal year to date. Okay. Now you can have all of them marked. It won't hurt anything. But fiscal year to date at a minimum is what would have to be marked. And then you'd need to do another adjustment on the 450 record for the gross. So same employee, 450 code, but now the type is going to be portion of fiscal to date gross that was earned as rehired retiree. Again, your date, and then the amount this time is the 1,150. Put in your description, have fiscal year to date marked. It's okay to mark the other ones as well, I believe. Okay, then after you save those, and then go back to the 450 record for the employee, you will now see those amounts in the fiscal year to date rehired retiree section. Then don't forget though, 591 and 691, those also have a rehired retiree total area. So this example is the employee's 591 record. So again, on this one, it only has the fiscal year to date rehired retiree withholding. So that will be equivalent to the fiscal year to date withholding amount in the fiscal year to date historical total section. So we want that value to be in this box. So again, you go to core adjustments, create a record for the employee. This time you're going to use the 591 payroll item code, and you're going to select portion of fiscal date amount that was withheld as rehired retiree. For this record, that's the only field that's available that's for rehired retiree. So it's not hard to find. Put in the appropriate date, enter in the amount, your description, and have at least fiscal year to date marked. After you do that and you go back to the 591 record, now you'll see that amount in that field. And then now when you run the fiscal year to date report, the error is gone. The employee now has only one line as a rehired retiree, 0% service credit. Okay, so that's the most common thing we see, and that's how you correct it. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, now some of you may have a situation where you have an employee that worked during the year, during the fiscal year, and then they retired, and then they came back in that same fiscal year. In this case, again, you want to make sure what's being reported is correct. And in this example, you would have two lines. One line would be reported with STRS days and a service credit for those earnings before they retired. The other line will be marked as rehired retiree. They will get 0% service credit on that line, but you want to make sure it is reporting the correct amounts for that period of time. Now, in this situation, I did get an error for the employee, okay? So in this specific situation here, the rehire information was not entered on the 450 record until after their first pay as a rehired retiree. And the rehire pickup amount, okay, what was actually contributed should actually be $3,420 because, you know, they missed that one pay as a rehired retiree. And the amount before retirement that was withheld should be $12,198. So these are the figures I want to see in this column on the report to be accurate. The employee has full pickup on pickup in this situation, so their contribution amount is actually inflated by the 15.96%. So if you have that situation, make sure you are calculating the inflated amounts. Okay, so here's an example of their fiscal year to date rehired retiree totals on the 450 record. Okay, so right now, the employer amount is only reporting $26.22, but per my calculations, it should really be $34.20. Okay, same thing with the gross. The gross will have to be recalculated as well. It's actually missing $5,700. That's the inflated gross. The employee was actually paid $5,000. So I'm going to do a correction for both of these. Okay, and then the employer amount needs to be increased by $798, which is $5,700 times the 14%. Okay, again, I'm using the inflated gross. So under core adjustments, I select the employee, select their 450, portion of fiscal to date gross as rehired retiree, $5,700 fiscal year to date. Another record for the 450, this time on the fiscal to date board amount. This time it's for $798. And then after the adjustment, now you can see my $34.20 that I wanted. My gross is adjusted as well. Okay, now you don't have to adjust the gross because that does not go on the retirement record. Excuse me, that's STRS advance file, I mean. But just so it makes more sense, you know, you could go ahead and get that updated as well. This employee is pickup on pickup, full pickup on pickup. So I'm also going to adjust the 691 record. So if I look at their rehired retiree amount, it only picked up $26.22. I'm going to increase that by $798 to get to $34.20. So again, the employee 691 record, I believe this is the only option that's selected or that's available for rehired retiree. Put in the 798. After the adjustment, now that's the amount that I did want. Okay, so then when I run the report again, now my error is gone. And you won't always necessarily get an error, but you know, make sure your amounts are correct. In this case, I did, so it was easier to spot. But now you can see they're getting 100% service credit because they did work 130 days before they retired. But now it has my correct amounts that I wanted for how much was contributed before they retired and then after they retired. Okay, and then the second line is the rehired retiree line, so they get 0% service credit for that. Okay, any questions about that? Those seem to be the most common things that show up as rehired retiree stuff. That's what I see the most anymore. Okay. I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, we talked about back posting earlier. So again, the other thing to look on this report, usually they're going to have very small amounts on here, especially for somebody that was just paid something over the summer that they worked extra, or maybe that's the only thing they did. But if they were paid in July, then they're going to be on this report. And if you see those and you're like, oh, that was really for something they worked in June, that really should be back posted. Okay, so this is just a reminder about back posting. Okay. The other thing to think about, which right now you would not know this, okay, is docs and early contract payoffs. So as you get closer to fiscal year end processing, that's the time you might know, hey, somebody's going to be docked over the summer, or hey, somebody's going to get a contract payoff during the summer. Okay. And if they're an STRS advance employee, then if you know that ahead of time, there are things you can do about those two situations so that you won't be off during the payback period. So as you're paying these employees over the summer, okay, if there's an advance amount that is going to be reported, if you do any of these situations, it can throw off getting balanced out or paying back what the advanced amount was calculated at. So just to remind you, and just for people that maybe are new to this, if I go into my custom demo account, if you go to core and organization, in the upper right corner, this is where the system keeps track of the advance. Okay, so at fiscal year end, when you're going through our checklist, you verified all the reports, everything looks good. You get to the point on our checklist where it says, hey, now you can create the STRS submission file. As soon as you do that, it's going to mark this advanced mode flag on this configuration, and it's going to put in the full advance amount. Okay, so whatever that total is. Then it's going to keep track. So after every pay, you pay during the advance period, which is your July and August payrolls, it's going to calculate from each pay how much money of that was advanced money. So how much of it belongs to the previous fiscal year. So it'll keep track of that total here. And then after you pay your last payroll in advance mode, hopefully this will clear out automatically. Okay. If you have a dock or payoff situation during those summer pays, that's typically what causes these to be off. Okay, so that's something you're going to look for at the end of your advanced payroll processing to see if this zeroes out or not. Okay, and that's a whole other discussion that we're not going to cover today, but I just wanted to make you aware of that's where it keeps track of it in the system. Okay, so again, if you know these ahead of time before you close out the fiscal year, it tells you what you can do to account for those amounts so that hopefully you will be able to balance out okay at the end of the advance period. Okay, losing my voice apparently. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail on that because that's something just to keep in mind as you get closer. We'll talk a little bit about that again when we review fiscal year end checklists. Okay, my voice will hold out. The next section, it talks about the balancing. So on the fiscal year to date report, if you go to the very bottom, that's where all the report totals are located at. So I'm going to talk about, there's different ways to balance. This is how I do it. You may do it a little different way. You know, it doesn't really matter as long as you can verify your amounts. Let me take a sip of coffee here. Sorry about that. Okay, so what I do is I look at the report total, and then I look at the taxed plus non-taxed amount. Okay, and that's kind of in the middle section of the left side. Okay, so I take that amount, and then I look at the amount advanced, which is right below it. And I take the difference of those two. And when I do that, I get $693,259.05. That happens to be the non-tax deposit pickup amount in the upper right corner here. Okay, so I just do this to verify that that matches this amount here. So this is the amount that I'm verifying. This is the total amount that has been paid to STRS for the fiscal year. Okay. So one option you have of verifying that total of what was paid is you can generate the payment transaction status report. That is a report that is listed in the reports drop-down menu. If you pay your $591 withholding electronically, then you want to mark the payment transaction type field as electronic transfers. Then you can select the $591 payroll item code from the codes list, enter an issue start and stop date for the current fiscal year, and generate the report. So when I did that, I got this screenshot below of the total from that report, and I got $806,992.90. Another way that you can verify the payment total is you can go to the payments option in USPS and then go to payee, and then either the payee payment checks or the payee electronic transfers tab, depending on how you pay those. In this example, we use the payee electronic transfers tab. And then you want to make sure on this grid that you have the name on the payment. The amount should be in there, and then you do want the issue date. And then what you can do is you can filter for the name of the payment for your STRS payments. So in this case, it's STRS Ohio. Use the issue date and do a filter for the fiscal year range. So I just did 7/1/24 ... tells it I'm doing a range, and then 6/30/25. Okay, so then for that fiscal year, it listed all of my payments to STRS Ohio. And then I clicked on the report option on the right side, and I just generated a PDF report. The PDF report will automatically total for you. So this is a screenshot of that total, and you can see it matches what I got from the payment status report I ran, $806,992.90. Okay, so you can get that amount either way, or you can check it both ways if you want. Then you have to look if you have 691. So if you have any employees with STRS pickup on pickup, then you're going to want to find the amounts from the 691 payroll item. Okay, the easiest way to do that is to run the employer distributions report that's under the reports drop-down menu. Use the fiscal year date range. I recommend that you not mark the box that says use only employer distribution accounts. That will ensure that it gets everything. Select the 691 payroll item and then go ahead and generate the report. So when I did that using this example, my report total showed $79,169.71. So then what I did was I took my 591 and 691 totals, and then I got this amount. Okay, that does not match what I got from the STRS advance report. That amount was only $693, $259.05. Okay, and that's because you have to remember that at the beginning of the fiscal year, you paid those advance amounts that belonged to the previous year. So you need to find what that amount was. The easiest way to do that is to grab your last fiscal year's STRS advance positions report. So you can go to Payroll Archive and grab that from last year's fiscal year folder, download it, and then get the total amount advanced from that report. Okay, so then if I take what I got from my 591 and 691 amounts, less this amount from last year, then I'm getting closer, right? I'm 692,44402 compared to this amount that's on my fiscal year to date report for this year. I'm off 815.03. Okay, so if you're still not zeroing out, then the next thing you can do is run the check STRS advance report. Okay, I'm going to flip back to my demo account. Okay, just a reminder, and for those of you that aren't familiar with that report, you would just go to reports, STRS reporting. And then the first option there is check STRS advance. Okay, so you could go ahead and run that. You'll be running it for, it actually uses end date. Okay, so if I hover over these, well, actually it doesn't say, does it? Okay. And it tells you in the documentation for the SST documentation for check STRS advance. I'll ask him about changing this because you're supposed to use the ending date from your payrolls that were during the advance mode, during the advanced processing period. So if you look at your first July payroll, look at the end date that you used, and then the last pay processed for advanced employees, look at the end date in that. So you're supposed to use the end date for the first pay and end date for the last pay. Then you can sort it however you want. We suggest sorting it the same way that the positions report, advanced positions report was sorted. And that way you can just do a comparison between the two reports. But right now you just want to generate it. Let me go back to my document here. And you're just going to get the total that's on that report. Okay. If that amount matches this total advanced amount, then that's not where you're off. Okay. So that's what happened in my situation. I ran the report. If I go down here, I think I have the example. Okay, yeah. So here's the amount, and that matches what was on my positions report from last year. Okay, so I'm not off because of that. Okay, so then you have to track down, okay, where's that 81503 from? In this case, we got lucky. I just happened to find a Meta Solutions ticket for this district. And it's like, hey, we have this employee that got refunded during the advance. Okay, so this employee was on the advance report. They were in advance mode. We refunded this money to them. That's why we're off. It just happened to be that 81503 exactly. Okay, so so that brings up a point that it's a good idea that when you're paying your summer pays, keep track of anything that happens with your STRS employees like this. That could help you with balancing for the next fiscal year. Okay, so that's a perfect example of that. Okay, now we do have a balancing spreadsheet you can use as well. So if you're interested in grabbing that, I thought I had a direct link to that. If I don't remember if it was on the report or not. Oops, sorry. So I'll show you where that's at on our website. So I'm on our main page, but if you go to Member Resources, Fiscal Services State Software, and then our links and documents, you scroll all the way down to the bottom in the documents section here. All of these reports that we're reviewing and that spreadsheet, if you want to use that for balancing, it's in our fiscal year end folder under the supporting documentation for USPS. Right here is the spreadsheet, Meta STRS Advanced Balancing. You can see it has a fairly current date on it. So you can download that if you want to use it. I'll bring up the one I used for the same example I was going through for balancing. And then you'll notice STRS Advanced Reports, there's a folder here. That's where all of these documents that we're covering today are located. Okay, so that link that was in the email that was sent yesterday, it should have taken you right to this page to get these documents. Okay, so if I go back to this, oops, oh, I did click the right one. Okay, so let me bring up that spreadsheet just to show you as an example if you want to use that. If you like that as a guide better than just doing it this way, you can use that if you want. I think it's this one. Okay. Yeah, so when you open it, I mean, yours won't have any figures in it. So this is after I took that same example I just went through and I plugged in the figures. So all of these totals will be blank, but you're only going to fill in the fields that are highlighted in yellow. Okay, so from the STRS fiscal year to date report, I took that total taxed and non-taxed amount, then that advanced amount, plugged them in here, and then it did that calculation for me. Then the STRS payments down here in green. Okay, again, this goes over, you can either get that information from the payments grid, or you can run the payment transaction status report and get that figure and plug it in here. And then if you have pickup on pickup, the $691 amount that you get, you just plug that in here, and that'll give you the total paid to STRS. Okay, then this calculation here, it'll get you that difference. Okay, so that's taking this amount versus this amount. And then you plug in your prior year STRS advance amount in this line here, and then you'll get that difference. So you can see there's my 815.03. Okay. Then down here, if you have an amount, first thing to check would be the check STRS advance report. So again, it does have a hint here, use the payroll end dates for the pay dates during advance for the previous year, plug that amount in here. And then the advance amount, prior year advance amount is coming down from up here. It just automatically fills that in for you. So you can see that showed no difference. Okay, so you still have that difference remaining. And again, we got lucky. We found, oh yeah, that happened during the advance period. That's the exact amount we're off. Okay, so if you want to use the spreadsheet, that's available. Okay, again, you might have a spreadsheet that's a little bit different. If that's worked for you in the past, just keep using that. If you do your balancing a little differently, again, as long as it's worked for you in the past, that's absolutely fine, whatever works for you. But you should balance out somehow to make sure your amounts look okay. Okay, and sorry about the scrolling. My fingers are getting a little nervous, I guess. Okay, are there any questions at all on anything we've covered or anything in general about STRS Advance? I'm trying to find where I lost my chat at.
Carol, there was a question from Carrie Lovely at 10:56.
Okay. And I will look at it as soon as I find my chat again. There we go. Got it. Okay. All right. What starting and ending dates do we use to run the advance reports? Thank you for asking that question, because I was going to talk about that way earlier in the session and I completely forgot. That's a good question. And our team has talked about that. Okay, let me go to my demo account. Okay, so when you're running the STRS advance reports, you'll notice in here, I have the fiscal year date range, okay? And that seems to be the consensus among our fiscal support team at Meta, is to use fiscal year range. But you'll notice it says for the description, academic year. Okay, academic year to me means first day of school, last day of school. And actually, in the old classic system, for those of you that remember, I always used to recommend the actual school year. Okay, so when I would run this for a district, I'd kind of guess because I didn't know what their first and last day of school was. So I usually used mid-August through end of May, usually, that type of date range to check. You can try that if you want. So you can run it both ways just to see if there's any difference on the reports. But in general, it seems like just using fiscal year range works just fine. Okay. So if you've gotten used, especially if you ever worked with me, you probably got used to using first day of school, last day of school. That's fine. Go ahead and try it that way, but go ahead and run it for full fiscal year range and just see if you notice anything different on the reports when you do it that way. Okay, but the general consensus, and also when the SSDT does their training on this, I always see them using the full fiscal year date range. So that's, I think, is what we're going to recommend. And I have asked the SSDT about that. I told them, it says academic year. If it really should be fiscal year, can you just please change that and say fiscal year? Okay, so there is a request for that. Okay, so if you do notice any difference running it between the two different ways, let us know. I certainly would be curious to know what you're seeing. When I was playing around with the reports, I did notice a difference in one situation, and it actually had to do with that rehired retiree that worked part of the year before they retired and part after. It did some funky things with the amounts on them. I don't know why that is, but once I did it by fiscal year range, it was perfect. So like I said, if you notice a difference, let us know. We'd like to know if there is any huge difference in that. But other than that, I didn't notice any difference in how I ran it. Okay. And we finished pretty much on time, just a tiny bit over. If there's no other questions, thank you all for attending. I hope this was helpful. And like I said, if you can, get started on these reports as soon as you can, get them cleaned up. The sooner the better, especially if you have some days missing, you can get those included on a payroll, get them taken care of right away. So thank you all for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.